Hi, everyone. My name is Kaitlyn Lyle, and I am a mental health ambassador for Athletes for Hope. And I'm also currently a third year at the University of California doing gymnastics there. And here I have with me Kat, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Salladin. I'm also a whole being athlete ambassador for Athletes for Hope. I'm currently a fifth year at Rutgers University. I'm a swimmer. I'm really excited to be here. So today we're going to talk about mental health and collegiate athletics, which is a topic that's highly requested, and we're really excited to talk about it. The first question is, how would you describe your experience as a student athlete when it comes to taking care of your mental health?
Yeah, so for me, I never really took care of my mental health until I feel like I got to college because I kind of was a gymnast. Everything that I was revolved around gymnastics, and that included my mental health. So, when I had a bad day at practice, I'd be like, oh, like my whole day is going to be bad now. So, I think the
Mm-hmm.
number one thing when learning how to take care of my mental health once I got to college was separating myself from being an athlete from who I am as a person, as a human being. And that kicked everything off really well for me because it gave me the opportunity to see that I'm a lot more than an athlete and I can do a lot more in other aspects of my life, like what I'm doing right now. Like I love helping people. And I think it's just very, very important to separate who you are from what you do and recognize that, your accolades, your scores that you put up don't define who you are as a person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I 100% agree. I definitely had a lot of trouble separating my identity as a person from my identity as a swimmer. I had a lot of success in high school. I was on the U.S. national team. I went to world championships, and like when everything came crashing down for me, I had a shoulder injury. I was like severely overtrained, and for the past 5 years, I've just had a whole host of like issues. And I don't think I really took the time to separate myself from my identity as a swimmer versus my identity as a person until like I was kind of forced to. So that definitely like having that identity wrapped up and just having like a history of mental illness from like a very young age, knowing that I have to take care of my mental health um, and having those like having something that used to be such a great thing, like my swimming used to be such a great thing for me and my mental health, having that suddenly become something that was detrimental to my mental health was really difficult and like something that I had to work through a lot in therapy. But definitely as a student athlete, it is hard to take care of your mental health. Like it is hard to find time to do therapy, to find the money to get medication if you need it. Like it's definitely a challenge, I would say.
Yeah. And something that I learned was that you're never too busy for your mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Even being student athletes, we have what we're taking like 20 units, we're working out 20 hours a week, and we have all these extra things, and it can feel really overwhelming, but you are never too busy for your mental health. And
Yeah.
putting yourself first is okay. Self care is not selfish, and prioritizing you is the most important thing. And that also means if you need to take a day off for your mental health, that's okay. You don't need to
Yeah.
be the misconception of athletes always being super tough. Like you don't show any signs of weakness, don't cry. Like it's not like that anymore. And it should
Mm-hmm.
have never been that way. And
Yeah.
I think recognizing that and showing other people that it's okay to, have a moment of just a day to yourself, whatever, time off. And yeah, just kind of staying present and like we were talking about earlier, detaching who you are from what you do and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely I I don't know where I heard. I think it was I really love poetry, and there's this one quote from Blythe Baird. She's a poet, and it says like if you're not something like if you're not actively working on improving your mental health, like you are hurting your mental health, and that really has stuck with me the more I've worked to improve my mental health because I've realized like it has to be an active choice every single day to put your mental health first and to not let it slip because if it does slip you don't even realize like a year later, you're really struggling and you're like, oh, why? Because you weren't doing the steps you needed to do to put yourself first. And it's just so important too.
Yeah, that reminds me of a quote that I read. I don't know who said it, but if it doesn't help you move forward, leave it behind. And
Mm,
it's kind of hard to recognize because some things like in sports, you're working so hard at one thing consistently, but if it's really not helping you in the long run and you're just hurting your body, hurting your mental health, ruminating over like these bad days, it's
Mm-hmm.
not going to help. So kind of taking yourself into a different perspective and looking at your situation from a different view can also help on those really hard days. And when you feel like it's just all overwhelming, I think that's helped me a lot too.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And I also have a question. So, how do you think mental wellness as a student athlete is different from a typical college student?
Um, I think there's a lot of like pressure and a level of expectation placed on student athletes that like typical college students might not have. Obviously, college is different, is could be difficult for anyone, but at least for me and like a lot of the people I know who are athletes, like our education is riding on our performance. And a lot of the time, that level of pressure and just knowing that you've worked your entire career to get to this point and one mess up could blow it all, that's a huge weight to carry every single day. And, coaches, college coaches in particular, just as a generalization, typically are not quite as understanding of mental health needs as a lot of other coaches in my experience I've seen, just because it is a business. Like, money is
Yeah.
involved, education is involved, everyone's replaceable is kind of the like the vibe of college athletics. There's always a new recruit, there's always someone faster, and your place on the team is not always secure. Even if you are the fastest person on the team or you go in as a top recruit, like I was one of the top recruits in distance in the country, and I almost got cut at my previous school because I just couldn't perform because I was sick. And knowing that and having that pressure on you all the time is just a level of stress that personally I think is really unhealthy. And it's just something that a lot of people don't understand. And something that I think that typical college students don't necessarily have to deal with.
Yeah, for me, I think overall, mental health is mental health, whether you're
Mm-hmm.
a student athlete or you're just a student. I think just as important for both groups of people to, get
Yeah.
help when they need help, reach out and feel comfortable doing that. But I completely agree with you in that there's a huge different type of pressure on student athletes. And I think, kind of like rewriting the playbook a little bit and going backwards and maybe not necessarily following all the traditions that coaches have always done,
Mm-hmm.
saying your mental health, like you don't need to worry about that, like you're like getting in your head, things like that. Like I think starting the conversation with young athletes would be
Mm.
super important, so then they realize and recognize it's okay if you're not as fast as you used to be. How can we move forward? How can we
Yeah.
improve, you and your sport, and also you as a person,
Right.
instead of it being like your coach is just like harping on you the whole time and making you feel lesser than you should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that kind of ties into the whole identity thing, that like we're raised in this society of like our sport becomes our identity from such a young age, because, you know, as a swimmer and I'm assuming as a gymnast, like if you don't perform as well, like you're crushed. You're like, you feel like your entire world is like broken because there's
Yeah.
nobody like behind you lifting you up and saying like it's okay, like we can hold you in this space and like you can be a not as good athlete but you're still just as good of a person as a human being. Like there are other things out there for you. And that's like, and I feel like I've only just begun to wrap my head around that. And I'm 23 years old and I've been swimming for 18 years. And that's just something that I think needs to be instilled in younger athletes and needs to be a more commonly accepted belief among coaches, because I really think that that pressure and that belief stems from the way coaches coach their young kids and college coaches coach their athletes.
I agree. And I think that it's a difficult conversation to have because there's a line between, pushing your athletes, but then there's that line that if you cross it, you might not be able to go back. And
Yeah.
creating a solid relationship between the coaches and the athletes and creating a bond where they feel like they're being pushed because they're being cared about. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's really important and something that, maybe we could have more workshops for coaches or just like kind of starting that conversation because, times have changed and it's not
Yeah.
like they're allowed to be as intense as before, but it's still
Hmm.
like coaches are struggling to find a way to discipline their athletes while still
Yeah.
being okay for their mental health. It's just
Hmm.
a fine line.
It is. It is. And I think like a lot of coaches might not understand that it is possible to have high performing athletes while still being a supportive person for their mental health. I think that that's like
Yes.
we're lacking a lot of education in that area. And I feel like there's a lot of coaches that also are just not willing to give up their old ways, which is unfortunate. But you know, the times are changing, new coaches are coming up, and like hopefully things will begin to improve as we go forward.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And kind of going along with that, we were talking a little bit earlier about some misconceptions about athlete mental health. And is there anything else you wanted to add about that?
Um yeah, I feel like something that I've been really thinking about recently. I mean, there's just so many misconceptions about mental health, but working with my own therapist, I feel like I've come to realize that there's a lot of grief surrounding my career, and just like having been at such a high level and then suddenly at like just being at rock bottom in my own sport. And I feel like it feels weird to say, because I feel like in this society that we're in, we're stuck in this dichotomy of both like worshiping sports on the one hand, but then on the other hand, kind of like writing off athletes who suffer and who struggle with like the pain of their sport, as it's people, you know, they're like, oh, it's just a sport. Oh, it doesn't matter. It's just a sport. It's not real pain. But like at the same time, we hold sports as such a like a pedestal in our society. There's so many things that are built on sports. And I think a lot of people, especially people outside of the sports world, don't realize that like the pain and the grief that so many athletes feel when things go wrong in their sports, it's like it's devastating and it's heartbreaking. But because sports are like it's just a game, we kind of not only do we feel that from other people, but we ourselves as athletes, I think, tend to kind of gaslight ourselves and invalidate our own pain by kind of being like, it's just a sport. Like, come on, get out of your head. It's just swimming. I know I did that. Like all through my career, I would kind of be like, why are you so upset about this? Like, it's just swimming. Like, come on, pull it together. But like working with my therapist, I've kind of realized like, no, like the things that I've experienced in my swimming career are like the most painful things I've experienced in my life. Like I've had so many other like various personal things, family things, traumatic experiences, but like when it comes down to it, the most pain that I've felt has been through the sport of swimming. And I think that we just don't really recognize that as athletes ourselves and as a society as a whole. And I think that is a misconception, because like just the pain that it can cause can be
Yeah.
just so deep.
Yeah, I agree. And what you were saying about like invalidating our own feelings, personally, when I was going through like my toughest times, I had like, you know, the devil on my shoulder and the angel on the
Mm-hmm.
other one. One of them like, stop being so weak. Like, what are you doing? And the other one's like, it's okay. Like, look at the positives, blah, blah, blah. But then
Yeah.
it's also hard because being positive about every little thing can also invalidate some of your real feelings and just kind of
Mm-hmm.
overlooking what's actually going on. And I know for me throughout high school, I was always like, it's okay, everything's great. Like, I'll be fine. I had a bad practice, but
Yeah.
I'm great. And
Yeah.
after COVID happened, I didn't have gymnastics and everything. I was like, well, maybe I wasn't all right. And just kind of
Yeah.
taking a step back, recognizing that we as athletes do invalidate our feelings often, and
Yes.
just kind of rewiring that pathway, and kind of, I don't know, feeling like it's okay to feel a little weak even if you're not like used to feeling that way, and it's also
Mhm.
okay to, you know, say it's okay, I'll move forward and be positive,
Mhm.
but as long as it's not I would say invalidating your pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely kind of going off of that, I feel like you mentioned, like the feeling of feeling weak, and like the idea, just like how athletes, you know, we're told like don't be weak, don't be weak. And like I especially I think that goes along with invalidating our own emotions. Like I know for myself, like throughout my career, whenever I felt weak, I would just be like, are you serious? Like this is ridiculous. I wanted to, you know, I left my previous school because I knew I just couldn't handle what was going on there. And um there was a long time where I was like, that's so weak of you. Like how, like, why would you leave like mid semester? You couldn't handle it. You're such a baby. Like I would just kind of like these words would just
Like the
be in
anger.
my mind. Yes. Yeah. Like just the anger at myself when in reality, like that is a misconception in our, in sports in general. That I think is like a societal belief that we're supposed to be like superhuman or something, which I think is totally ridiculous. And,
Yeah.
um, I I think that like reframing what I think of as weakness and what I think of as strength has really helped me like kind of come to terms with the things that I've chosen to do within my collegiate career that might be like seen as weak by, or could be seen as weak. I'm sure nobody would look at what I've done and been like, oh, she's weak, but I myself might think that. um, but like in reality, choosing to leave a school and going to a new school because for my mental health is actually an act of strength, and it's an act of love for myself. And I think like learning to reframe those things that like societally we might think of as weak, when in reality they're actually strength because you're choosing yourself and choosing your health. That is like a process that I think a lot of athletes need to start going through, and like the conversations need to happen about that, because I think a lot of people have this belief in their mind that they're weak, when in reality I think if they took a long look at like what it actually means, like the definition of strength versus the definition of weakness, like making a change, or like saying out loud like I can't handle this, I'm going to choose to help myself, that's an act of strength, that's not an act of weakness.
Exactly. Yeah. That's super admirable too. And, you know, having someone that's close to you on your team that like reaches out for help makes you realize, hey, it's okay to do that. And I admire her for
Mm-hmm.
that. And I do agree. I think that as athletes, we are our biggest critics. So, you know, we
Mm-hmm.
might have a bad day at practice, but other people would be like, wow, she worked so hard. She just kept working at it until she couldn't anymore. Things like that.
Yeah.
And I think in my process of growing and healing, one of the most important things that I recognize is that growth and healing is not linear. You're
Mm.
going to have hard you're going to have hard weeks, you know, it might even last months, but
Yeah.
knowing as long as you are focused on your mental health and you know you want to get better and you're willing to do whatever it takes, then you're on that upward trajectory and you'll get there someday.
Yeah.
Just don't let the bad days or don't let your inner critic really like tear you down. Don't let those thoughts ruminate, because that's when it can get a little messy. And I've learned that firsthand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
um Yeah. So, like, as we're kind of talking about student athlete, like the misconceptions, what kind of resources do you feel like you've had as a student athlete, and what do you kind of wish you had?
Yeah, so at Davis, we actually have a ton of resources, and it's super great because there's a lot of QR codes posted around campus, and I know our coaches send us out links and resources and whatnot. But I do wish that it was a little more interactive, maybe, or we would have actual meetings and stuff, because,
Mm-hmm.
you know, sometimes you see flyers on the walls and you're just like, oh, okay. And then don't really like have the courage to
Yeah.
actually like go and or like you feel too busy. You're like, I'll get to it later. So I think just having more real conversations like this, or, you know, sitting down with your team and really personal things like that, opening the
Mm-hmm.
conversation, I think is the best way to start. And, you know, you'll feel like you have a family afterwards because you're very vulnerable with each other and just open to positive change for you and for the team.
Yeah. I really like that you brought up like having that team that's a family, because like I 100% agree. I think that like obviously there's so many resources available to us as student athletes, but I think the number one thing for me in college that's helped with my mental health is now having this new team that's like a family. It's a supportive group of women who, like, I know that on my worst days, like they will have my back no matter what I decide to do. Even if I were to decide to quit swimming tomorrow, like they would still love me as a person. And knowing that is like the most important thing, I think, as an athlete. Um, and I think that, as for things that um, would be better, I think that, I mean, as a social worker and as like somebody who's studying like clinical mental health, I'm a huge advocate for like trauma therapy. And I really think that everyone would benefit from trauma therapy. And I feel like a lot of times athletics departments focus on sports psychology and sports performance and things like that. And there's not a whole lot of resources for athletes as a whole human. And I feel like looking at like athletes just through that lens of like sports psychology or sports performance, even if you do talk about things that are outside of that, and you talk about your life, like it's still looking at the person through that lens, and it's a very narrow scope. I just feel like there's huge room for growth in uh, professionals who specialize in trauma and substance abuse and learning disabilities and mood disorders and all the other things that affect athletes and that affect their sport, because it's all tied together. And I think that there's a huge need for that, because it's more than just it's more than just sports psychology, because we're more than just athletes. I think that that's something
Exactly.
that really could be beneficial in college.
Yeah, I agree. And so besides therapy and things like that, or, links to resources, how else would you say that you support your mental health? Or what are the things that you do on like a daily basis that you think has helped you the most?
Um, so for me personally, therapy and finding the right type of therapy for me has been huge. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of trauma therapy. Everyone has trauma. You don't have to experience a specific traumatic event to have for therapy to be very beneficial for you. Um,
Yeah.
I currently do a type of therapy called brain spotting, and that has been hugely beneficial for me in my mental health journey. I also take medication, and I've learned that even though there have been a lot of many years where I've felt embarrassed about that, or like wanted to go off of it, or even tried to go off of it, like it's okay that I take medication, and it's okay that I can be open about taking medication. It's just like somebody else taking a medication for any other physical illness. And
Exactly.
it's really like, I feel like especially in athletics where like our bodies are so important to us, a lot of athletes that I've talked to about the benefits and side effects of medication are kind of like, like I don't know if I want to try medication because like what if it messes up my career? And like obviously for some people medication is not beneficial, and for some people it is, but I think that
Mhm.
having in athletics, having that open dialogue that medication can be more beneficial, like you don't have to be as scared of the side effects, because even if there are a few side effects, as you know, there might be, any medication might have side effects, but like the benefits that it can bring you can can positively impact you so much that it also positively impacts your sport. And I think that that's important to have that open dialogue about that in athletics.
Yeah, I agree. And when you're talking about medication being beneficial for, mental health or physical ailments, it reminded me of something that I read, and it was like, it doesn't matter where your pain is located, all pain is valid pain.
Mm.
And it's so easy, and I fall prey to this often, to be like, oh, my ankle's sprained, I'm fine, like whatever, I can work through it. But just kind of recognizing like, okay, I still need to take care of my body. I don't want to do something that could, lead to something worse down the road. So just
Yeah.
remembering that mental health is just as important as your physical health. And
Yes.
not very many
100%.
people not very many people recognize that or realize that conversation, and I think it's super important. And also, something that helps me with my mental health is recognizing that everything is an opportunity for growth. So,
Mm.
when you're having a tough day, or you sprain your ankle, it gives you an opportunity to take a step back and think about what you need to do to help yourself and help your team, regardless of if you're doing your sport or you're not. Like, you have a valid position on the team, regardless of where your headspace is at, what you can do physically and whatnot.
Hmm. Yeah. I 100% agree. I think that having that team environment, I know we kind of talked about this as well, but like, I feel like another piece that often athletes kind of fall prey to is comparison. I know you kind of
Oh yeah.
talked about like invalidating your own feelings. I think humans in general, like I think we tend to compare to others just because that's just how we're wired. But I think athletes specifically, when our entire like career is built on beating the person next to us, I feel like even when it comes to like our pain and our trauma, like we will literally compare. Like, sometimes these thoughts enter my mind, and I'm like, oh man, like I've had COVID 3 times. Like it sucks. Like this sucks so bad. I've had long COVID. Oh my gosh. And then I'm like, well, this girl like freaking tore her ACL and can't swim. Like that sucks even worse. Like who am I to like feel bad about that? And then I'm like, I get stuck in this loop of like invalidating my own emotions and comparing myself to other people, which I think is not only just comparing and like I wish I could be that fast, but also like, why do I feel this much pain when they have it worse? Like that is such a toxic behavior that is so hard to stop as athletes because our whole
Yeah.
careers are built on comparing. Like it really is.
True, very true. I struggled a lot when I was younger, comparing myself to other people and always feeling like I wasn't good enough, I'll never be
Mm-hmm.
there. And it doesn't help when, your coaches, some of your coaches tell you the same thing,
Yeah.
but you recognize that everything in life is a choice and you have the choice to let those thoughts get to you, or you have the choice to just, focus on you, focus on your path and do whatever you can do to make yourself better. Because at the end of
Yeah.
the day, that's what you have, all you
Right.
have is your strength. And it doesn't matter what the people next to you are doing, because if you're distracted by them, you're going to be put behind. So
Yeah.
I always try to focus, stay in my lane, help others, be as best as they can be. And ultimately, I think that'll help me in the end too.
Mm-hmm.
So I really try to focus on doing that every day. And also, like when I get overwhelmed with practice, or I know I have like a ton of assignments to do, whatever, I choose to stay present
Mm.
and break down my day. If I'm feeling very overwhelmed or anxious about what I have coming up, I write everything down that I have to do, and I just take it one by one by one. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's helped me in all aspects of everything. And I don't know, I think that's something that most people should try to look into if they get really anxious about
Yeah.
their day.
Yeah. Definitely breaking things down, keeping things as simple as possible. It's so easy to get wrapped up in our own minds. Um,
Right.
Sports are like they're just so mental. There's so many things like our minds are so powerful. It can really be the thing that can like help or hurt you,
Exactly. Yeah.
which I think is like I mean, you know, when it comes to like what you want other student athletes to know is just like it's our mental health is so important. It is the thing like your body is going to change. You will not do your sport for the rest of your life, but you are with your mind, you are with yourself for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And if you like write yourself off and don't take care of your mind now, you're going to have some work to do later in life. So, it's really important to take care of yourself. And
Exactly.
and feel
Yeah.
those emotions.
Yeah. Let yourself feel the things that you probably don't want to feel.
Yeah.
I I do is I was always like, I don't want to reach out for help because I feel weak, what we were talking about
Mm-hmm.
earlier. So if other athletes, student athletes are feeling this way, I would recommend starting to journal, because
Mm-hmm.
I started a journal and it's only you. You're not being judged by anybody. Nobody's going to tell you what to do, what to write. And it's just kind of you sitting with your emotions, your thoughts. And that's been, I think, the number one thing to help me like on my mental health journey, and just kind of keeping it consistent too. And
Yeah.
just like something that I learned through that is you can't worry about the things you can't control.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of things in life, a lot of things that we as athletes can't control. And so just recognizing that your attitude is going to determine your direction, not necessarily the situation itself. And
Mm-hmm.
even then, oftentimes the situation isn't even the thing that's causing you your anxiety, your stress. It's how you respond to the situation. And
Mm-hmm.
so I found myself responding to a lot of situations, maybe not necessarily in a negative light, but just like I was just so overwhelmed. So writing about those things and just getting my thoughts organized, getting all that out of my system, like you start like feeling fresh. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one thing, number one advice for people who are too scared or just not ready to reach out and talk about things yet. And it's just a great gateway to, get further help down the line.
Yeah, 100%. And you brought up a um, really interesting point. I think you said something about I don't dang it. I don't remember. Hold on.
Sorry, I got the
Cut this part.
so
What did you say about the, did you say something about like allowing yourself to feel, like allowing yourself to process it through writing,
yeah,
or something
exactly.
like that? Okay. Okay. I'm remembering now. um,
Exactly.
um, I think like a little kind of going off of that, is just like kind of recognizing when things are actually your fault. I feel like as athletes, especially individual sports like gymnastics or swimming, gymnastics is a more individualized sport, right? Uh, or just any sport in general. I feel like athletes, because of the pressure, just external pressure, internal pressure, highly motivated, intrinsically motivated people tend to blame themselves and blame ourselves for the things that happen to us. I know that that's what I did. Like I had in high school a emotionally manipulative coach, and for a very long time it's very common, unfortunately.
It's way too common.
Yeah, it's really sad. And it's really toxic too, because I feel like as young, impressionable kids, like we learn to take on that burden of blaming ourselves for the things that people do to us and things that coaches do to us. And we carry that weight and that burden of like the things that coaches and teammates and mostly coaches have done to me. It's taken me like until this year, in the past 6 months, to really recognize like I didn't deserve that. I didn't
Yeah.
deserve the pain that they caused me, and I didn't choose to carry the weight of this. So why am I blaming myself? And I think that's really important as athletes, and like really any intrinsically motivated person, to recognize like the things that are done to you um, are not your fault. And circumstances that you can't control. I think you mentioned the circumstances you can't control, having that mindset. And I think of like letting go of the things you can't control, but also letting go of the blame of yourself, of the past, of the things you can't control. Like for me, I think with my shoulder injury, I always got caught up in like what could I have done? What could I have done? What could I have done differently? And in reality, like the reason I had a shoulder injury, well, first of all, was just chance. I got really unlucky. Second of all, my coach was wrong. He was wrong, and he did it to me. And finally being able to recognize that and like realize like I was a kid. I was 17 years old, and there's nothing I could have done. I couldn't have known. And like letting go of that blame of myself has been hugely freeing for me, because carrying that weight for 5 years has been so heavy. And I think a lot of athletes carry the weight of their quote unquote failures or quote unquote, setbacks as their fault.
Yeah, I completely relate to that. So I actually broke my back like completely
Oh, wow.
about 5 years ago. Yeah, had a little fall,
Mm-hmm.
but I was told by my coach, like, get up, you're fine. So I was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, yeah, you're right. I'm probably fine. So I ended up competing on a broken back for 2 years and was
Wow.
consistently like, I'm fine, like, whatever, totally invalidating all my pain. And,
Mm-hmm.
for a while afterwards, I was like, why would he not believe me? Like, why would he ever do this to me? Consistently blaming him. And then I realized that in order for me to start to get over it, I need to forgive him. So a
Mm.
lot of the things that we, feel blame for, or like we blame other people for, I think the number one thing in helping yourself is forgiving them, because
Mm.
how can you move forward if you're always kind of stuck in the past, blaming people for things that maybe they didn't even like intentionally try to do. So that
Yeah.
that really got me through a lot freshman year, kind of starting my whole journey, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just kind
That's
of
it.
realized like it wasn't intentional, I don't think,
Right.
but even if it was, it's out of my control, it happened, and
Mm-hmm.
now I'm trying to use it as an opportunity to grow as a person, as an athlete, and, try to stop that from happening to anybody else if
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah. Forgiveness is hard. Forgiveness is
Really
really
hard. It's
hard.
all of it's not easy to start,
Yeah.
but it's so worth it.
It's
It's so worth
important.
it, even though
Mm-hmm.
it's, like, so hard to get things out, even if it's just journaling. But,
Mm-hmm.
it's painful. Sometimes it's going to be more painful when you start to, work on yourself, and it'll just get easier. And, when you feel like, wow, I feel a little better, it's going to make you want to continue to work on yourself and be better.
Yeah.
So starting is definitely the part, but it's 100% worth it.
Yeah. And I think it's also really important through this whole process of like beginning to work on your mental health. We're beginning to forgive the people that have hurt you, beginning to forgive yourself for the blame that you carry, is to give yourself grace. And like you mentioned earlier, like healing isn't linear. Understanding that there is going to be times where like you thought you were okay and like you really were okay, and then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, sliding back down. But yeah, just giving yourself grace in this process, because it's hard and it's a lifelong battle to, enjoy this thing we call life, like it's hard.
Yeah. I think to wrap it up, I would just say, recognize the importance of separating yourself from being a human and from being an
Hmm.
athlete, and realizing that your self worth does not come by your scores or your accolades. And that, I don't know, I just want to tell everybody that, you can do it. It's not going to be
Yeah.
easy. It's going to be super hard to start, but surround yourself with people who are willing to listen, not listen just to
Hmm.
reply, but listen to fully understand you and your situation that you're going through. And I think that's like the number one thing that I would give.
Yeah. And kind of going off that, I think the number one thing that I would give that like, and I would tell this to myself too, because it's like what my process is right now as I've kind of beginning to transition out of sport, um, is just like allowing yourself to feel that grief and not invalidating your emotions, because like grief in athletics is so real. It is real and it is valid. And like I don't, who cares what people may say? Like, they might, who know, like opinions people might have, like, oh, it's just a sport. Like, no, it's been a big part of you, and you're allowed to feel how you feel, and
Exactly.
you can work through it, and it will be a process, but it's a good process.
Yeah, and progress is progress no matter what. And recognizing, little baby steps is super important in this
Hmm.
process, and just kind of allowing yourself to finally feel proud of yourself for something. And especially because it's working on your own mental health, that's going to be there for the rest of your life, like you were saying earlier. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I just want people to know self-care is not selfish, and
No, not at all.
it's definitely a necessity, and you're allowed to take care of yourself before others.
Yeah. What would you like, maybe this could be the last question. What would you feel like is like your, recently, like celebrating those baby steps? What's one baby step that you feel like you can say, like, I'm really proud of this. I've come such a long way in my mental health journey.
Yeah. Okay, that's actually awesome. You're asking this because today something crazy happened. So the skill that I broke my back on 5 years ago,
Hmm.
I never did it again. I was
Hmm.
terrified, like didn't even want to think about it. I would pee my pants. But
Yeah.
I tried working on another new skill, and it just wasn't really cutting it the past 2 years. So today I decided to, put some big girl pants on, and I tried the skill that I broke my back on,
Uh-huh.
and I made it, caught the bar.
Wow.
And like I felt super proud of myself because, I finally squashed my fear and just truly believed in myself. And, I came in with a positive attitude about it. I didn't let my fears take over. So things like that. I was really proud of
Yeah.
myself today.
Wow. That's
Yeah. What
amazing,
about you?
Kaitlyn.
Thank you.
I definitely would have to say, so I for about four or so years, I've struggled with self harm. It's it's a very common thing, and I think a lot of people, there's a lot of taboo surrounding it. But I'm 6 months. 2 days ago, I was 6 months clean, and that's the longest it's been for me, for 4 years. So I was really really proud of that, and I think that's definitely my
Oh,
biggest like not accomplishment, but like milestone for me.
that is an accomplishment. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm so
Thank
proud
you.
of you, and I'm super happy
Thanks. I'm
that,
so proud of
you're
you too.
here sharing your story. Thank you. Um, it's so great talking to you, though. Honestly, I really enjoy, a new perspective on all these things. And, I really appreciate you for sharing your story. I learned a lot from you.
I did too. This has been great. I You had so much good insight. It's great.
Thank you. You as well.
Thanks.
Hopefully we'll chat soon,
Yes.
but it was great talking to you again.
Great talking to you too.